everybody. We're going to get started again, if you can find your seats. So before we turn things back over to Tim to talk to us about recipes, I do want to go over a few places where you can continue all of the wonderful conversations we've been having today. The first is here at DrupalCon. I will be hosting a nonprofit Birds of a Feather session on Wednesday at 1:30 in Harris LL3, whatever that means. It'll be very similar to the breakout conversations we've been having all day, except the topic will be whatever the people in the room want to talk about at that very moment. It's going to be a surprise. Please join us on Drupal Slack. If you are not on Drupal Slack, please sign up for Drupal Slack. That's where all the cool kids are. You can find the information on how to join at drupal.org/Slack. And then once you have created your account and joined the Slack, you can find us in particular in the nonprofits channel. I know, shocker. Nonprofits, us, awesome. We also have a page on drupal.org, which kind of talks about what we do as a nonprofit community with Drupal. The main thing we do there is we publicize our monthly call. We do this every month. It's generally the third Thursday of the month at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Folks in Europe and Asia, I can't do that math. I am so sorry. But again, it's very similar to the breakout sessions that were happening today. It's an hour long of conversation about whatever people bring to the call that day. We have a collaborative notes document, which you can find at n10.org/Drupal/notes. That's where we set the agenda every month. That's also where the call-in information can be found. We publicize it, as I said, on our community page and also in the Drupal Slack. April is a little weird. The third Thursday of the month falls right in the middle of N10's conference. N10 sponsors this call. It feels a little weird to counter-program their conference. So we may be moving that. We will announce that on our community page and in Drupal Slack in the nonprofits channel. So please stay in touch. I hope to see many of you on Wednesday. And with that, I will pass it over to Tim.
Hello again, everyone. I promise there are no terror clowns this time. Heard the boos. Okay, I can add them back. So I'm going to expand my topic a little bit because based on the questions and comments that we had for Pamela, Christina, and Emma at the beginning, it seemed like there was a lot of areas of interest related to some of the foundational technologies that have gone into Drupal CMS. So I'm going to talk about a few of these different things. And this message that I don't have access to place in media objects might be troublesome. We'll see about that when we get there. Oh boy. I had them before. Okay, we'll get there when we get there. This is a solvable problem. Let's see. Okay, so let's start first with the recipe discussion. So I don't know if we even gave a thorough definition of what recipes are. We kind of ran right through it. I'm seeing some shaking heads. So what are Drupal recipes? I'm going to talk about them conceptually and then technically. So Drupal recipes are applied to Drupal sites. They are not installed. They are easy to share. They do not lock sites in. And they are composable from other recipes, so they can chain together sets of functionality. More specifically, they are a combination of one or more modules, some set of configuration, and some configuration actions that can happen on a site. So today, when you are saying, I want to add a feature or functionality to my Drupal site, you are generally speaking choosing a module, installing it, going into its configuration, figuring out how you want it set up in particular, and maybe pre-configuring some new content based on that, content types, whatever the case may be. Recipes can kind of bundle together that whole process across multiple modules and configuration that work together, or across a single module and a complex set of configuration that configures it in a certain way, variety of things like that. And so Drupal CMS sort of builds on all of these things together for a lot of the functionality that you see there. And that's why when we were saying before that if you're already on a Drupal site and you want some of this functionality that comes from, that you're hearing about in Drupal CMS, rather than a migration to Drupal CMS or any of these sorts of things, you can actually take the same recipes and install them, apply them to your site. Got to read my first bullet point. I'm going to start off by suggesting that you can check out the recipe cookbook. This is also something that you can find just sort of Googling, looking at Drupal.org documentation. It's being built up and filled out more and more. There's a variety of existing recipes, functionality-specific recipes, site starter recipes, different things that do all sorts of things that might be useful to you. And so there's things like password policy stuff, the whole admin experience layer, events calendaring and scheduling. I heard somebody talking about that in a breakout session report out. Registrations, just a huge variety of different things. But something else that's really important, especially for everyone who was having this multi-site kind of conversation earlier in the day, is you can build your own recipes, right? So if you are in a position where you are deploying a number of sites, you might start with a unified kind of code base, but rather than doing a sort of single code base version of multi-site, you might say, we would just want to apply a consistent set of recipes across our nonprofit use case. So this is something, again, similar to what you might have seen previously in that sort of distribution model. I don't know if folks from the Y are here today, but YMCA kind of famously did their broad-based targeted distribution for all of their regional Drupal presence. And they could do a similar thing today, transforming that into a recipe-based collection of things for multi-sites. So we're going to get a little technical. Hopefully I don't put everyone to sleep. But what a recipe is actually a YAML file. It's a sort of text configuration file that contains a couple categories of information. So it's much simpler than it might seem at first. It's a name, a description, a type of what it does, and then an array of the different things that are in there. So for example, I'll step through this. There's a few different sections, but here there's a recipes area that tells you here are additional recipes that this recipe should install, right? And then from there, here are particular modules that are actually going to be installed in the course of applying this recipe. Here is input that might be requested from a user applying a recipe during an installation process, like maybe it needs to collect an email address for some reason because this recipe is configuring an account and it needs an account email. Then there's configuration, where you can say, okay, there's a directory on my file system that has configuration that's been exported, provided by the recipe creator, and I'm going to import that related to either this module or related to this entity type that already exists in Drupal. So you'll have this configuration section of your file. And then you'll have actions, which are, you can essentially script a lot of the configuration steps that you would have previously done manually after installing these modules, right? So you're not constantly reconfiguring your web forms every time you do this, or constantly reconfiguring whatever else you use across your installations. You're saying, within this recipe, we're going to add a user role, we'll call it editor, it is granted permissions, et cetera, and that is just configured as long as these recipes are applied, right? And then it's mentioned here, you can also have content that is not configuration, not anything else. There can be a directory that installs default content or standard sets of content, so that really, like, the recipe can generate most of a site or most of a category of functionality, or kind of whatever the case may be. They can be large, they can be small. They also come with a composer file, which makes them available to Composer and installable in the same way that a module is, right? So it presents itself as, a Drupal recipe / whatever the recipe name is. Has version, has its compatibility information and requirements, all of those kinds of things. So there is work going on to make it easier to sort of browse and select recipes beyond the ones that in the installer of Drupal CMS are presented to you automatically. We're in the process of making that a sort of generic thing so that the recipes created by the community as a whole are just easily available to be installed. So perhaps rather than installing a MailChimp module for your newsletter or whatever, you might instead install a newsletter recipe that has MailChimp and a GDPR consent and something else and configures them all to work together. So instead of you having to snap those things together. So that's kind of one of the foundational pieces of Drupal CMS that is really a part of core. Recipe functionality is all in core, but it made creating something like Drupal CMS possible, and in turn, it makes creating your own internal sets of recipes to use throughout your organization possible. And it makes sharing those across organizations possible. So again, while this description and these YAML files, this markup looks perhaps a little bit technical depending on your background, the end goal is that you're essentially browsing feature sets and choosing to apply them to your site. So that is going to be the recipe part, and we're going to get close to where I'm going to have to troubleshoot that permission thing in a second. The other part of the cookbook, so this is the same QR code, so if you've already scanned it, that's fine. There are other sections. People have already started creating tools and utilities to help make recipe creation easier. So like I said, something you may very well want to do is take something you're already doing on your site, turn it into a recipe to be easily applied elsewhere. So there's a recipe generator, there's a recipe installer kit that creates an installer for recipes that you have locally available for that particular site. There's extensions, various kinds of things being built. So again, if you have a use case where you're like, I'd love to not have to reconfigure all of these things when I deploy this to a new environment or to a new department, to a new regional area of my organization, you can use some of these tools to take some subset of your functionality and turn it into a recipe that can be idempotently applied to these other sites. So that's a really, really powerful thing, but it's also looking at a lot of YAML, so I didn't want to keep doing that for however long we're going to be up here. So the next thing I want to do, I may have to pause to resolve these issues here, is I wanted to talk about the Experience Builder in a little more detail. But let me see if I'm going to, yep, hold on. Let me see if I can solve this permission issue. So hold, please. You can take a second to check that phone. My apologies. And see if I can get that working. I think somebody moved some. This is going to be an issue. Okay. All right, you'll have to bear with me. This is going to be a little rough because I don't think I'm going to be able to track down those in the short term. But let's see if I can't make something work here. Are they all just going to hide even the screenshots from us? Okay, hold on. An exercise in live slide generation. Thank you for your patience, y'all. Okay. All right, I'm going to be painting some word pictures and asking you to use your imagination. Oh, yeah. I'm so good at drawing. No. We don't need stick figures. That's not really going to help. So, okay. So, oops, I'm not even plugged in. Not that it'll help. So one of the things that you're going to see in the Dries Note tomorrow and in the Experience Builder sessions that are happening throughout the week are demonstrations of sort of the fundamental features of the Experience Builder. And I'm not going to be able to play the videos for you today, so I apologize. But one of the key aspects of this is going to be in-place content creation. So being able to create new pages, navigate existing pages, all from within the Experience Builder UI. So what you're going to see is a user interface that looks something like this here, where you actually have what looks like a live preview of your actual content, and you have properties of that content, layers, like it looks more similar to almost a Figma or even a Photoshop kind of interface to using your website builder, and dividing the content of the website into various sorts of regions and things like that. So in particular, what you'll see, what you see at the top of this particular screenshot, this sort of homepage changed little label right at the top, is this is a, we talked about it briefly earlier, so this is a workspace of your site that Experience Builder depends on, where it is kind of staging all of these changes that you may be making to your particular Drupal site, right? And you are now able to edit any node in Drupal and a variety of components and any global regions like the header and footer using a set of sections and components. And they'll be, you'll sort of drag and drop them from the sidebars here into the middle, something like this hero block component, be able to simply click into it, change the text, click into it to drag in a CTA button, change its destination, et cetera, et cetera. And it is transparent to you as the content editor, whether or not you are editing just content of this single page or the content of this header itself or the content of your global footer, all of those things until these changes are staged. It has native undo and redo functionality like, you know, we've had in Microsoft Word for 25 years. But a lot of useful just sort of fundamental features that get the basics right. And then you'll see in the upper right corner here this, do I have my cursor? Yeah, this review changes button, right? So you can go to a full page preview of all the changes you've made. You can select a desktop width, a mobile width, all of these things to see all this content. Click review changes to see, look, you've made a change to the global header. Did you mean to do that? Did you realize it was going to be global? You've made changes to this homepage node, to these other pages. This drop down here, letting you switch between all the different pages you've edited in this workspace, et cetera, et cetera. Summarize those changes and then let you say ship it. Or potentially, based on your permission schema, some of your content editors may not have that last button, that last let's publish this all, but they'll be able to create that workspace, and maybe someone else at a higher level in your editorial team does that final review and publishing. And you'll be able to do this in multiple workspaces. So for example, if you're preparing for let's say now you want to start preparing for a 2026 campaign, a major fundraising effort, some kind of site takeover, that kind of thing. You can have a team working on preparing that all in sort of a drag and drop WYSIWYG interface while still using other workspaces to change the aspects of the site that you need to change for next week's events, et cetera, whatever might be happening there. So thank you for watching the lovely animations that showed all of those features. As I said, when you get ready to publish, you get these sort of previews. You can see here our example has, look at this new thing that I drag and dropped in and added 3 parts to, all these extra columns and some icons. It was really cool, guys, right? Yeah. So, and yeah, we'll do that final review and publishing. I mentioned the global regions. Again, I would love to be clicking in and showing you this kind of stuff, but that is, what's interesting about this is compared to, I think Christina or Pamela mentioned, like, we're benchmarking against the site builders even at the very lowest end of the market, the Wixes, the Squarespaces, you're looking at these template marketplaces. One of the huge disadvantages of all of those is it's not structured data. You wind up with these like hacked together Frankenstein kind of pieces when you actually look at the markup behind those things. So in this case, when you're going into these global regions, it's still fundamentally modifying the menu entities, the items in that menu. It's still creating, it's still creating consistent, reusable content. It's still using views layouts under the hoods that you're dropping into these designs, all of these kinds of things. So you're not suddenly using, Duplo blocks to build a Drupal site. You just have this, this more powerful way of looking at it. So in some ways, I'm going to say I did this on purpose so that you wouldn't get you spoiled on the awesome stuff tomorrow. An important element of this is, so this relates to the design system concept that was also briefly mentioned this morning, which is that the intent with Experience Builder 1.0, which will ship in Drupal CMS 2.0, is that you were given a default design system that includes a whole set of components, a whole set of the front-end styling of those components, the Figma file from which those components were built that you can then work on and modify, and you can then begin to either change, adapt, or add to those components as the basis for understanding how you build a Experience Builder compatible front end, right? And one of the really important things about that is its reliance on single directory components, which again, we've talked a lot about how vocabulary can kind of scare people away from what we're talking about, but the fundamental importance of this feature here is that the sort of front-end rendering elements of a component don't have to be tied into a monolithic theme directory and all of the files and all the twig and all of these sorts of things. Instead, request access for permission. Instead, you can actually create these individual components with just React or Tailwind or JavaScript without knowing any Drupal. So you can bring in a front-end developer who has no Drupal experience whatsoever and say, I need a 3-column card component. Can you style that for me? They can actually build that within the Experience Builder. They can open up the single directory component file, add the relevant CSS and JavaScript or whatever it might be for that interaction, add that component, and they may not even know that what you're using under the hood is Drupal, right? So that dependency on having Drupal-specific front-end knowledge to do theming in this Experience Builder is hopefully greatly reduced. There will be areas, of course, where it's just not easy to figure out how to do it that way, and you'll have to go into the actual full design system and the full theme itself. But it's going to be a really powerful extension and make it significantly easier to do this. And again, show it to you in context of what you're building. So hopefully also this relationship between, hey, I'm a content editor, I'm building out the 2026 membership campaign for the Drupal Association or something like that. I've gotten it 90% of the way there, and I'm like, I need a thing to do the thing. Help me with the thing. Doesn't become this long back and forth where you're getting these brand new Figma files, someone's wireframing from scratch, you've got your paper prototypes, you've got a bunch of meetings going back and forth, and you're like, no, I just write box. And they can work on that same thing, and they already have the rest of these components, the Figma files, the known widths, the fonts, all of these things, where hopefully the time to iteration is much, much lower in building out the front end. So from here, these videos would have padded things out a bit. We're going to go back into some generalized Q&A, and then I have a little bit to present after this, and then before we wrap up for the day overall. I am happy to do Q&A on any of the things I just threw at you, but also on anything that you've been talking about throughout the day that has come up among these groups. I think myself and the organizers would be happy to take those questions depending on who's best equipped to answer them, but yes.
I've got a question with regard to Experience Builder, and maybe this is best answered in this session. But with regard to content strategy, content governance, and what may appear on the surface as kind of more of a freewheeling approach in component construction and page design, it looks like you have something to say about that. So.
Sure. Yeah, there was a gesture at a question in there. So what I think the foundation of that question is this seems like we might be giving people enough tools to be dangerous, right? With something like this, where someone could literally drop a cat GIF into the header of your site and all these kinds of things, right? So yeah, what kind of editorial controls are in place to protect? Actually, honestly, that would be great.
I'm like, let's do that.
Yeah, bring back the marquee tag. That's true. There were dog people here, and it's okay that they're wrong. So, but no, the full permission system in terms of the content and editorial stuff. I don't know that they've worked out yet. I mean, Emma, maybe you know, but have they worked out what happens? I'm not sure they figured out, like, if a person doesn't have access to a particular content type and they attempt to interact with that type here, I assume they're going to be given a sort of permissions error, basically, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm going in to edit the event listing content type because I want to add this thing here, but I'm actually not on that team. I don't have the Drupal permission. Yeah, I don't know the exact model of that, but I know that the permissions, none of this bypasses the fundamental Drupal permission. Yeah. Yeah, to expand on what Emma's saying, so because these are being done in workspaces that are not published until a final review, it could go in two directions, right? Either we'll have the capacity to be sort of individually restricted, or possibly it might go in the direction of, if you have touched a content type where you don't have the permission to do the final publishing, it'll have to be held until someone who has all the relevant permissions does. I think we'll see.
Can I ask a related question? It has to do with there being multiple workspaces being under edit at the same time.
Yeah.
Is there a conflict resolution system yet?
Not yet, no. So Ben's question was, is there a way to do conflict resolution, like find merge conflicts between workspaces? At the moment, there hasn't been work put into that yet. The current work has just been around making it possible to have multiple workspaces. So we'll see.
Back to recipes, I noticed that you could have like default configuration that would come in.
Yes.
And actions, and there seems to be somewhat of an overlap there, maybe, because couldn't the actions be exported as configs as well?
So that's a really good question, and I'm not enough of an expert to give the best possible answer, but I can tell you the motivation for having both. So let me pause for a second here. So on this screen we see, you can import configuration for something. You can import the breadcrumbs into the easy breadcrumbs. You can import a node type article, et cetera, in configuration. Actions are a little bit different, where you might say, we're going to take this particular role, we're going to grant it editor, and you're right, you could have a role exported as config with certain kinds of things. The difference being that because a recipe is orchestrating multiple modules and sets of configuration at once, sometimes things have to be in a particular order. So generally speaking, the config actions are like, we can't just import all the config until we're certain that this module and this module are both configured, and then they need to do X together. So generally speaking, you notice how it says create if not exists, right? It's doing these things where it's like checking to make sure that this hasn't already been done in some way. So the actions allow a little bit of extra logic and a little bit of orchestration between multiple feature components so that they can work together. Whereas generally config import is like restricted to the module it's for and is not aware of the other things that you're doing. Yeah, sure, and then I'll get the back.
Composer file in each recipe. So you mentioned you could compile your own recipe from other recipes. Is there a potential that between those composer files
Yeah.
could be a conflict?
So this is a great question as well. So if recipes can all do kind of an almost unlimited set of ways of configuring sites, and they can reference each other and start applying other recipes, can they create conflicts? Yes, that can happen. There is some conflict checking kind of prevention stuff being thought about and worked on. That's one of the areas that I'm weakest on, but the Jim Birch, some of the recipe initiative folks are here, are presenting on it, and are in the contribution room pretty much all the time looking at that. And there's a couple things that I know that they have done in terms of, I don't know if they've probably not covered all use cases. I don't know if anyone's ever accomplished that in any technology project, but they do have these sort of things of like, this and this seem completely incompatible, Or, especially in the composer JSON, you're trying to apply this and one of these recipes says it's only, version whatever, and this is a completely different version, you're clearly going to get those basic errors. But yeah, I don't know how sophisticated that conflict resolution gets, so I think you may have to be a little careful. But in the back.
How does the experience builder relate to configuration management? And I guess a code base and version control.
That's a very good question. So, Experience Builder, for the purposes of being used as a content editing tool, is no different really than node edit forms or having the block admin, block placement kind of stuff enabled. And you could then, you should then still have some best practice to export whatever you're doing to config that might have been done with it. But I don't think you should think of it as replacing or in conflict with traditional config management, because it's not different from those content editors having real-time access to do some of these things. It gets slightly more blurry when we talked about the component stuff, for sure. And there is going to be, probably not on the main stage presentation because it's a little in the weeds, but I think in one of the Experience Builder sessions, there'll be a discussion about passing back to version control the additional components that have been added. And that should be doable. It should be visible to your Git tree if you're depending on the environment you're doing it in, so that you can commit up the components as if they were, imagine them being added in the Experience Builder mini IDE for components versus a regular IDE that the developer might be using. And yes, you might be thinking about, are you doing that on production? But yeah, folks are thinking about this a little bit. There's going to be some new best practices to develop in terms of catching up, I think. And you may not allow, depending on your particular use case, you may not want to enable that in anything other than the development environments, right? So, additional questions? Again, it doesn't have to be about these 3 topics. It can be about any of the challenges you discussed in breakouts or other things of that nature. Yes?
If you're placing blocks and you have blocks on every page or whatever, where does it show up in the Experience Builder? Is it something you can override for that page?
So that's a good question. I'll do my best to show this. Whoops. Going the wrong direction. Let's see. Do any of these have? Okay. I'm going to have to do my best to show this. But, okay, so you have on the left-hand side, you have libraries and layers, right? So these are components. These are, you notice there's code and overrides and things like this. Some of this is still moving around because it's very early alpha, but let's assume that there's some part of the library where you're managing a block and you drop and place it on a page. This right-hand side will have properties of that block, including the traditional available only on these paths, all those standard properties of a block. So you'll be able to do it there. And if you do so, when you navigate to the ones where it's relevant, they'll appear. Where it's not, they won't. So you will still sort of set that manually rather than trying to drag it everywhere. But if you put that a little asterisk in on appear on pages, it should appear on all the pages within the preview. So.
This is kind of a dumb question, but we're talking about components. We have paragraphs and we have blocks. Why 3 things? Are they all components? Can't you just have one thing?
Well, the only reason we don't have one thing is because as much as this is a 1.0, Drupal's an 11.0, right? So we're just coming from a history of previously having a variety of other things, right? And so components, though, tend to be atomic design elements that would go within a page. And something like a block is not quite the same as that. It still often serves other purposes. It's a display mode that comes out of views, or it's all sorts of things. But that's an interesting question for Emma, maybe, about is there any reason why it matters that we make that distinction once everything is treated as part of your library? Depends on whether or not there's, I think, semantic meaning behind it at that point that the end user will need to care about. So it's good feedback because it may not be necessary. Oh, yes. Yeah, and then when we talk about the existing layout models, layout builder, paragraphs, whatever other previous layout tools existed prior to Experience Builder, there's certainly an intent and almost a necessity, a known necessity, that in order for adoption of this to be successful, there will have to be a migration path of those into whatever the appropriate equivalent is in Experience Builder.
In a multi-site environment, would the library be the same and we can multiple sites can access the same library?
I'm not certain that they have solved this problem yet, addressed this problem yet, which I hate to keep saying about multi-site, but they haven't put it quite at the top of the list when they're looking at this 80% use case. I think the intention would be to have, in the same way that multi-sites are built on a shared code base, they're on a shared library in terms of design system. That would be my guess as to the trajectory. I wouldn't want to say more at the moment.
Building on the first question that was asked, is there a possibility to have permissions per component in future?
Permissions per component within a page?
Yes.
That's a
Not just the page, but just that an editor with certain access should only have access to, let's say, hero and image, and not access to a slider component, something like that.
That is a great question. I do not happen to know the answer. Do you know, Emma, by any chance?
I don't know, but I can see why it would be needed. Like,
Yeah, I could see absolutely why you would want it, for sure. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, cat gift.
yeah, but
Cat gifts, and also I can definitely see a use case where I would want to set my content editors free on the content well, but not the header and not the footer.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I suspect people are thinking about this, but I don't happen to know what the answer is going to be. Yeah. To be honest, again, if you are on the more tech-savvy side and willing to use buggy and bleeding-edge stuff, there is a current design system demo version of the Experience Builder Alpha that you could try, and you may find that that exists or that it doesn't yet. So we'll see. Yes.
In terms of the Drupal CMS trajectory besides Experience Builder, kind of do you know where the roadmap is going? Are there other specific?
I do. I'm not allowed to tell you yet. The keynote is going to have some pretty interesting and I think exciting things on that front. I will make a cheeky little analogy. Think about what I just described recipes as doing, and think about what that would be at the next level of complexity or the next level up. And then imagine that, and then come to the Dries note.
We talked a little bit about backwards compatibility with Experience Builder, such like if you're coming from a background with like blocks and paragraphs, you could theoretically migrate into this.
That's the hope, yes.
I have some questions about like future compatibility. Like if you were to start building a site with Experience Builder, would you then break out and go back to paragraphs and blocks, or like what would that look like?
That's a great question. I suspect that would be pretty rough. So sorry, let me repeat the question. The question was, we've talked about backwards compatibility, the notion of being able to migrate into the Experience Builder modality of building sites. But what happens if another shiny new page builder kind of thing comes along, or an older one is simply better for your use case, and you somehow want to use that as well, either moving to it or using it in parallel? I have heard some rumblings of, oh, well, you could use this, but that, but if paragraphs were enabled in this content type, it's not available in the Experience Builder. And so you'd be splitting your UIs, is possibly the answer. I'm certain that wouldn't be an ideal user experience, but that is some of the rumblings I've heard from the Experience Builder team. Bearing in mind, still pretty early days. More likely, I think we will start to see extensions to the Experience Builder ecosystem once it hits 1.0. That may bring back some of the things, if there are elements of what you had done in a paragraphs type environment, for example, that are missing from that 1.0, I suspect some of that may come back in the form of contrib that just builds on top of this model to restore some of those sorts of things. But I just want to make sure that no new faces. Yes? That's fine, yeah. We're wide open. Oh my gosh, yes. Oh, we're gonna get spicy again. Where's my clowns?
That Matt guy owns the copyright or the trademark for WordPress.
Yeah,
Dries owns the trademark
of Drupal.
of Drupal. What is preventing the Drupal community from having a similar?
I'm glad I'm here because that's a DA question specifically. Let me go back to, here we go, just to have that on the screen. No. So the question here, let me try and summarize. Well, actually, first show of hands. Who's familiar with the WordPress drama? Has anyone not really heard of it? I'll keep it brief. Basically, there was a dispute between the founder of my interpreter. The founder of the WordPress project has his own commercial entity, Automatic, right? And Automatic is the primary funder of the nonprofit WordPress Foundation and the operator of WordPress.com, which is the largest host of WordPress, what's the commodity sites, basically, right? He got into a significant dispute with WP Engine, which is perhaps even bigger than Automatic on the mid to higher end market of WordPress sites, about the level of contribution they were giving back to the, or lack thereof, to the WordPress project, which is certainly a challenge I sympathize with. But he decided to pursue or attempt to enforce that contribution through legal action over use of the trademark, and claiming trademark status not over just WordPress, which he certainly did hold, but also the abbreviation WP and all these different things. And in, I think, Brazil and the UK, they've granted him WP trademark just in the last weeks, and some things like this. So yeah, this has created an unstable business environment in the WordPress ecosystem at the moment, because at one point he cut off all updates, including security updates, to customers who were hosted on WP Engine. He was court ordered to restore that, and things like that. So it is a healthy question, especially in regards to my earlier slides about oligarchies and monopolies, about could someone throw a temper tantrum and put Drupal in jeopardy, right? And there's a couple reasons why I think Drupal is in a significantly better position, and I think that there have been some articles written about it. So one is, yes, Dries does own the trademark, but the Drupal Association holds a perpetual license to use it in the form of the nonprofit foundation. So he cannot revoke the association's use of the trademark. Similarly, the Drupal Association is not funded entirely by Acquia or even primarily by Acquia, Dries' company. In fact, no funder of the Drupal Association provides more than not even 10% of our total funding. So we are not hostage to a single corporate entity in the same way that I don't think people realized necessarily that the WordPress Foundation was. And so there's some legal protections in the form of the way we're allowed to use the trademark, even if he decided to go a different direction, and protections in terms of our financial independence to be able to continue to operate. Also, we own all the Drupal.org infrastructure. It is not hosted on Acquia infrastructure or anything else. My team personally maintains it. So significant difference there. This is true as well. So one of the things that I'm particularly proud of, because it was partly my baby to create back in 2016, is the maker and taker problem, or the tragedy of the commons problem, which we probably don't have time to go into full detail of. Quick summary, tragedy of the commons is that you are financially incentivized not to contribute back, because any time spent contributing back is time not spent competing with with a competitor. If you've spent 20% of your time contributing back, your competitor gets your 20%, and the time they didn't spend, they can focus on their own innovation, right? This is the tragedy of the commons. And this is underlying all these debates about makers and takers and how you make taking organizations contribute back to communities and common goods. In Drupal, inspired originally by an idea that came from Dries and then architected by myself and a couple others, we decided to try and address this by making the Drupal.org marketplace based on the measurement of contribution to the community. So we measure code contribution, event sponsorship, speaking, volunteering, all of these different kinds of activities that individuals do. And those individuals can choose to say, my company sponsored me to do that, or my client allowed me to do that as part of the work, whatever it is. And those organizations earn credit, which is what qualifies them for our partner program and what qualifies them for their position in our marketplace. So our contention is, by giving them direct positive incentives to contribute back, and by necessarily enforcing things if people are gaming the system, we're going to try and control that ecosystem better than attempting to wield the cudgel of trademark enforcement or other things. And not to say that there aren't places where trademark enforcement should happen, because there are ways that trademarks can be used dangerously or deceptively, but not in that particular, I don't like your face, so you can't use my word anymore, kind of context. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Other questions? There and then there. Thank you very much. The question was, am I going to be writing another book soon? People may not know, I also write fiction. I have a fantasy novel called Fog and Fireflies that came out last year. The audiobook was just released a couple weeks ago, and I'm working on book 2. Thank you. Yay. Hey. Cheers. Yeah. And sorry, here in front first and then in back again.
Can you speak a little bit as to why there seems to be sort of a shift away from open source? And maybe that's a presumption, but it seems like kind of, 2010 and 2020, there was huge amounts of open source, at least from my
Yeah.
in use, and it seems like there's a shift going on now in this decade of like back to.
So this will be, so the question was, why does it seem when open source felt like it was winning for at least a decade, if not longer, and certainly is still winning in places like the server space, all of that kind of stuff, like there's no even competition there. Why does it seem like there might be a backslide in the technological landscape at the moment? I think there's a few reasons. I think one of the big ones was SaaS services becoming the kind of primary way to do this because they offered, in theory, they offered a lot of low maintenance ways to achieve the same thing. And again, elided over that fact that like your data now resides with them and they'll choose how you can access it and what it costs to access it. But it did become much easier to be like, oh, we're gonna pay a subscription for something instead of building something. And open source projects, especially as cloud services became part of every product, were not well equipped to pivot to, oh, the product is not just the software, it's the connected services that feed the software. So a lot of open source projects just weren't prepared to compete in spaces where that was a necessary part of things. And that goes further into the AI thing as well, where it's like the amount of resources in terms of lawyers per engineer that you need to ignore copyright long enough to launch an AI company is not something that open source can do. And a lot of compounding things like that. On the flip side, I think we're having a massive switch the other way just as soon as people can find something that fills the same need. In the EU especially, the focus on digital sovereignty was already strong. National requirements to use open source software in place in many different regions. The entire European Commission and the United Nations run on Drupal in particular, but as does most of the Australian government. But I think it's going to get direct focus and attention and funding to say, if it's public data for the public good, it should be public software. And that's being recognized as people are discovering, it's painful, but like as people are de-Americanizing and demonopolizing their infrastructure. So, but that's my 2 cents. Yes, in the back. Okay. Yep.
But then in like the earlier Drupal CMS, it's like the demo of like you can integrate with these AI tools.
Yep. Oh yeah, I'm aware of the cognitive dissonance.
It's like, is that not by default?
No, so the question was, if there are so many regulatory concerns and ethical concerns and accuracy concerns with AI generated tools or AI generation tools, why is it that we are offering the integrations with them out of the box in Drupal CMS, and why do we actually still think that's important, and why do we think that it can be done ethically, may not necessarily always be done ethically? First, I want to make a distinction between generative and assistive AI. And that's a really, really big point that's relevant in the Drupal case at the moment. Right, generative AI being we're taking the consolidation, the giant primordial soup of all of the images we've stolen from the internet and generating out whatever you want. And similarly, we've scraped all of the metadata of all the top websites in the world, and we go into a meta thing and say, you want these ones because that's what the other sites are using, right? So the generative stuff is certainly more problematic, but the assistive stuff is using the data of known interaction models and data about how users click on things and what they're looking at and what they mean when they ask a question to navigate interfaces and to activate APIs and these sorts of things, which is fundamentally less problematic in that way. And most of the initial Drupal use cases have been focused around that, around assistive AI, and again, around this human-in-the-loop form of AI. That's not to say that there isn't the risk, like after enabling, and it is not enabled by default, among other things, because they're commercial, and you have to choose a subscription and all these things in order to start using them. But also because I don't think we'd ever turn it on by default, because again, there's going to be regulatory environments where you just aren't allowed to do that, and maybe it'll be as simple as a single button one day, but there'll probably still be at least that for the consent there. I feel like maybe I had something else to add on the AI front, but yeah. Yeah. Models. While at the same time saying, oh, copyright shouldn't apply to us. Yeah. Your stuff can't be proprietary, but our stuff can. Ignore that it's made out of your stuff. Yeah. That distinction I think is really important, and it was helpful for me. And one of the issues right now, I did a different presentation where my spicy inversion of what I was supposed to say was about one of the reasons that I think there's a turn against the tech industry, apart from the fact that it has become inextricably linked to finance industry and hedge management and all these kinds of things that can have deleterious effects. The other part of it is they've kind of forgotten the first part of the value chain, which is offering something of value to the customer, right? Because we keep thinking about the customer now as part of the product, part of the data. And like, one of the reasons why I think there was not this enthusiasm for AI when it suddenly came on the scene is because these companies themselves were not telling us why we cared, why we should like it, what it was going to do for us. And it's a big missed opportunity because there's some really powerful things that especially the assistive side can do, but even the generative side can do for accessibility for disabled folks and just to optimize the workflows of regular folks. But instead of saying, hey, this is going to make your job or your life easier, they're saying this is going to take your job or take your life, and your employer won't need to hire you anymore. And that seems like a bad marketing strategy to me. But yeah. Anyone want one more spicy take? No.
Not spicy, but related to that, when using Drupal AI module, it should be possible to, and correct me if I'm wrong, to not use the OpenAI services or Google services,
Right.
But a self-hosted version of open source one,
Yeah.
which will still be a kind of ethical question that you are using the model
So-
that has been trained on stolen data,
Yeah.
but at least one of the problems will be alleviated that your data won't be shared with these.
Yeah, so I'll reemphasize this point again, right? It's not like your only choices are these large corporate LLMs from Meta, Google, et cetera. There are true open source AI projects out there and LLM models and ones that have been very deliberate about actually respecting robots.txt flags and copyright statements and all of these things. And there are ways to build things that are not the same as these primordial jumbles of external data, but again are, for example, we're sort of considering this. It's probably not going to get up our priority list, but we could make a model based on all of the Creative Commons licensed. Anything you post to Drupal.org that isn't GPL is Creative Commons licensed. And we could build a model which is the Drupal AI assistant that has the consolidation of all the documentation we've ever written and know that we're not stealing from anyone. Like, we can be certain of that based on knowing what we fed into it, right? And so that those options will all still exist as well. So.
Curious on that point, is the Drupal Association considering a service, which would be, I mean, or someone, is that discussion happening just generally?
Yeah, so the question was, did the thing could that be real, the thing I just described? The answer is maybe. I think I mentioned up front that the DA is, 18 people currently, and the engineering side of that is 5, including me, and has been for. Right, and I've been writing fiction the whole time. So
don't buy too many of his books.
Yeah, that is an issue. But no, I mean, I think there are multiple discussions happening around that. Both from a community point of view of just trying to make an assistive like Drupal documentation tool, and also should the DA figure out a way to leverage something, and frankly, if we're going to be pushing people to commercial services, is there a way to help fund the DA by doing that, and who would be the appropriate and ethical partners to do that with? So those discussions are happening, but it's early stage stuff for sure, and a lot of questions to do. I think I need to, these are amazing, but.
Yeah, we gotta wrap up. Do you wanna?
I want to make a few things. I have some housekeeping after this, but I want to let them.
Okay. All right, well, so there is gonna be a survey that Tim is gonna share, but I just wanted to say thank you all so much for coming. I wanna thank all the speakers. You were fantastic. All of the discussion facilitators, there were so many great conversations going on. I could see them, I could hear them. Thanks to so many of you who traveled really far. And who stayed this whole day. It's really, really important that this community is really important because my career was made out of it, and I want other people to feel supported. So if you like this summit, please tell the DA. If you could bring more people from your org, if there were more discounts or other benefits that your org could get to go to DrupalCon, please let the DA know. Please, make your needs known to them because that's how they decide what to do with this time that we're in. And and I think, thank you, Tim. I think that's it.
Let me do a few quick house cleaning things and just some, not quite as quick as they maybe should be, but I'll try and go fast. So if you want more Drupal CMS content, because I know this has been a very popular discussion, there is a dedicated page, events.drupal.org/Atlanta2025/DCMS, or scan the QR code, which has all of the Drupal CMS track content and a calendar you can subscribe to for just that track, right? So that should help you out. I'm gonna wait until I think everybody's got it. Birds of a Feather sessions. So I don't know if we explained what they were. Birds of a Feather sessions are unconference style, largely uncoordinated sessions that someone chooses to host on a particular topic or with a particular group of people and say, hey, we want to come together, just like the roundtables that you saw earlier. And so there's an online schedule of what's been submitted so far. You can submit your own if there's slots left and people just decide what to go to. It's not a big AV setup and lecture presentation, it's a discussion. So there's already some of that coming together. A few small requests. There's a program called the Ripple Makers. You're at a nonprofit summit. I'm going to do this. This is the individual supporting program, the individual membership program for the Drupal Association. Ripple Makers are the passionate individuals who believe in driving Drupal as a high-impact digital public good. We are a UN-recognized digital public good in the technology space, which is something we're really proud of. And the goal is to harness collective generosity and your commitment to support all of the things that we do so that I can keep giving spicy takes at DrupalCon. The particular impact of that program is funding all of the things that we do, things that my team does, including maintaining the security certificates that sign the software for automatic updates, the hosting of those updates, the packaging of Drupal's releases, our GitLab issues. We spend about $25,000 a month just testing, running automated tests for Drupal to ensure its code quality, all of these things that we're just providing out to the community. Advocacy like the Open Web Manifesto, all of these kinds of things, and this event itself, so on and so forth. There's a lot of things you can do. I'm going to play a short video if this one works. Do we have audio is the question. I don't think we do. Well, you know. Here's Faye. She's a community elected member of the board and a wonderful person. And we do have some subtitles, so that's great. She works for a Drupal end user that is heavily focused and invested in Drupal, and is part of our board of directors and the Drupal diversity and inclusion lead. So someone you should talk to if you want to get involved in that community as well. I'm gonna skip her pitch, I think, because I don't know if just reading the slides is gonna work. But she wants to invite you to think about the community, to think about how do you build a career on something that's free. All of you have done that, at least all of you who are already using Drupal, and think about giving back to the association, that small staff, all volunteer board that put these kinds of events together. So that is the QR code you can scan. I'm going to leave this here until I see at least as many phones as I saw before. You don't have to go much further, but yeah, I've been in nonprofit since I was 7. I was licking envelopes, so envelopes, you remember those. So thank you for those of you who are already Ripple makers. I really appreciate it. It literally funds my job and my ability to do all of these things. We have a survey that we would love for you to participate in. There's a general event survey, but I inserted mine instead. We are curious about creating an RFP portal on Drupal.org as a place to centralize the kinds of requests that organizations like yours or across all sorts of sectors might want to do. We're not going to replace internal portals that you might have to use, especially on the government side. They have their own portals, but we would love things to be cross-posted to a central place. Where we can connect you to the people who are makers in our community and make sure they're the ones who get the business for your organizations when you need help. So I'd love to hear from you about this short survey. So with that, enjoy DrupalCon and join me in thanking the organizers of the Nonprofit Summit.
They did all the work.